Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-885-937-4977, and get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. Taking a look at the storm, the Chukchi Sea storm that's impacting much of the west coast, we do have some of the max wind gusts as of 1 p.m. this afternoon. Cape Lisburne has seen the strongest at 90 miles per hour. Tin City, Red Dog, Savunga, and Point Hope have all seen over 70 miles per hour, and quite a few others up above 50 miles per hour, including Shishmaref, Breivik Mission, Deering, Point Lay, and Wales. And we'll keep monitoring this storm to see what other high winds that we can capture, as well as any of the flood damage for the impacted communities. We are always interested in any kind of storm reports that anyone can offer. You can offer those to us through any of our social media networks or through our website, weather.gov/Alaska. Just make sure to stay safe before going out to take any storm survey results for us. Taking a look at our warnings, we do have quite a few warnings and advisories out for this day. We'll start off here in southeast Alaska, where we do expect dense fog to come in tonight, sometime around 4 a.m. through around 10 a.m. for quite a few areas of the Panhandle. And then as we step up into northern portions of the state, the Alaska Range has wind advisories out throughout the Alaska Range in the Deltana and Tanana Flats, as well as in the upper Kuskokwim Valley. For the Tanana area, we are going to see wind gusts up to as high as 50 miles per hour, and we're going to see 45 miles per hour down by the upper Kuskokwim Valley area. And for the Alaska Range, some stronger winds there are going to be up closer towards 60 miles per hour. And for these areas, we do have the ones up in Tanana Flats area going out until midnight tonight, as well as the upper Kuskokwim Valley, and then for the western portion of the Alaska Range out until 6 a.m. on Friday, and then the eastern Alaska Range is going to be the one lasting the longest out until noon on Friday. For the west coast, we're getting a little more detail with these upcoming slides, starting off with the high wind warnings up along the northwestern portion of the state, especially along the coastline. That is going to be out until 6 a.m. Friday morning. We have hit a lot of the peaks in most of these areas, but that doesn't mean the threat of high wind has diminished. Winds will diminish slowly through tomorrow morning. Some of those strongest winds still expected up to as high as 70 miles per hour. For our coastal flooding, we do have some of that starting to really pick up now through Friday evening for much of the northwest coastline, including the Chukchi Sea coast, Kotzebue, western and northern Arctic coasts. Some of those areas, the highest are going to see 5 to 7 feet above normal high tide. That's going to be from Cape Lisburne to Wainwright. And then we'll have other areas above 3 feet through much of those areas from the Bering Strait through Ukqiagvik. We'll get a little bit more detailed on this in a moment. A little bit farther to the south, we have high surf advisories as well as coastal flood advisories out. Coastal flood advisories are out for the Deering area as well as Gullivan. And then for the high surf advisories, that's going to be areas from Nome through the Norton Sound area down through the Yukon Delta. You're going to see some higher rises for the water here as well, up to as high as 3 to 5 feet. This is going to be a lot of coastal erosion expected with these, and less so of inundating waves. Up north, we could see more water getting past those break points. And for these ones down in the Norton Sound area, we're going to have advisories lasting out as far as 4 a.m. on Saturday. So for some of the timing of this in particular, we'll break out some of the communities here. If you'll note, farthest on the right, we have our winds, and we're trying to target a time when they'll diminish to around 20 miles per hour, and we are expecting that into Friday for most of these locations. Again, most of the locations with the high wind warnings, we do have those already starting to diminish, but they won't decrease down to around 20 miles per hour until some Friday afternoon, but many later into Friday night. For the highest water timing, we're really starting to ramp that up. We have not hit the highest water levels for most of these locations. Many of them will be tonight, early Friday, or even Friday afternoon. You can see on the list here some of those more northern locations, such as Wainwright, Point Lay, Point Hope, going to start into early Friday. And those highest ones again, Wainwright and Point Lay, 5 to 7 feet for water above normal highest tide line. Looking ahead into the future in the Bering, we do have another low coming in. This is going to be Sunday into Monday time frame for the southwestern coastlines. A little bit of uncertainty with this low. We're not quite sure on the track of it yet. It's a little far out, but we will see some strong southwesterly winds with this and the possibility for more high surf for those areas of the Kuskokwim Delta and Bristol Bay area. We'll keep an eye on this, and please check our forecast upcoming to get more specifics on this as we get better data coming in. Taking a look at our current satellite imagery, we have our front pushing through the west coast that's bringing those strong winds and potential for coastal flooding into the area. This front extends down from our low out over the Chukchi Sea through the northern portion of the state and all the way down through southwest Alaska. Taking a look now at the Gulf of Alaska, we have a different system moving in towards the Gulf water, some cloud cover out ahead of that, out over the northern Gulf, bringing some rain to the area. And finally, way out west, we have increased cloud cover as we have another system coming in towards the western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at today's weather, you can see that front draped across the western portion of the state, bringing rain through quite a few areas of the west coast with some snow up in the Brooks Range. But main thing to note here is those strong winds, especially along the northwest coastline, as well as the potential for coastal flooding for areas from Norton Sound through the Utqiagvik area, with the highest potential for coastal flooding from the Bering Strait through Utqiagvik area. And that is going to bring some rain in there, and some colder air behind this going to start to mix some of that rain with snow. We will have some showers out throughout the Bering Sea as well as around the Pribilof Islands and the eastern Aleutians. Out over south central Alaska, we have some rain out over Prince William Sound down by Kodiak Island, but high pressure is largely dominating the eastern areas, keeping a lot of the precip out of the panhandle. Then as we move into tonight, under that high pressure, we will start to develop those areas of fog throughout the panhandle, and we'll have some lingering rain showers throughout the northern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, northern Gulf Coast, with some snow at some of the higher elevations, including the Alaska Range. Out through the interior, primarily rain out east, but a little bit of colder air coming in from the west, a mix of rain and snow for the western interior, primarily snow as we get up into the Brooks Range, and a mix of rain and snow up along the northwest coast, with primarily rain as we drop down closer towards the Bering Strait. Out over the Bering Sea, western areas are going to see some rain extending out down to the western Aleutians as we have another system coming up from the North Pacific. For Friday, that system will move out over the central Aleutian Islands, bringing rain to the area, as well as continued rain for the Bering Sea, pushing rain now into the Pribilof Islands. Out over south central Alaska, rain coming up from the south, continuing to bring rain to the North Gulf Coast, with some snow again at some of the higher elevations. Southwest Alaska will see some rain extending up into the interior, and then a rain and snow mix for the Brooks Range, still seeing westerly flow from our old system, bringing in some rain to the northwest coastline. Down in the Panhandle area, high pressure continuing to dominate with areas of fog in the morning hours. Finally, as we move into Saturday, a low out over the Gulf water is going to bring some rain back to the Panhandle. Widespread rain is expected on Saturday. And our other system will have moved out over southwest Alaska, bringing rain throughout much of the southern mainland, down and through the Alaska Peninsula and up into the interior. And then up as we get closer towards the Brooks Range, cold enough to see some snow up there. Rain out over the Bering Sea, and another system coming in towards the western Aleutian Islands, bringing rain back to the islands on Saturday. For our temperatures, lows Friday morning for the Panhandle dropping down to the lower to mid 40s, warmer farther to the south. Lows in the south central area dropping down into the mid 40s for the most part. Anchorage actually staying a little bit warmer, only dropping down to 48 degrees, as well as at Kodiak. For our Friday afternoon highs in the Panhandle, getting up to near 60 degrees for most locations. Again, a little bit warmer in areas to the south in the low 60s there. 56 out by Yakutat, and lower to mid 50s for much of south central. Colder in the more interior locations such as Talkeetna and Glenallen. And then Saturday morning lows going to drop down into the mid 40s for much of the Panhandle area. Sitka staying a little bit warmer, only getting down to 55 degrees. And then in south central Alaska dropping down to the lower to mid 40s. For our Saturday afternoon highs, getting up into the mid to upper 50s in the Panhandle, warmest farther to the south. Then in south central Alaska, getting up to around 50 degrees, some areas getting into the lower 50s for the Kenai Peninsula. For our more northern locations, dropping down to the mid 30s out in the western portions of the interior, low 40s for the eastern locations, near freezing for much of the Arctic coastline, and mid 30s for Kotzebue Sound, near 40 degrees for the Norton Sound. Friday afternoon highs getting up to 50 degrees in the interior. Western interior going to be a little bit colder, staying in the mid 40s there. Upper 30s for the Arctic coastline, and then in the lower to mid 40s for the west coast. Saturday morning lows going to drop into the mid 30s for much of the interior, into the 20s for some areas along the Arctic coastline, and then near freezing for the west coast. Saturday afternoon highs getting up into the 40s for the interior, mid 30s for the Arctic coastline, and upper 30s to around 40 degrees for the west coast. Friday morning lows in southwest Alaska, mid 30s for the YK Delta, mid 40s for the Bristol Bay area, as well as much of the Aleutian Islands. Friday afternoon highs getting up into the mid 40s for YK Delta, lower 50s for the Bristol Bay area, near 50 degrees for the Aleutians. Saturday morning lows going to drop down into the 30s for the YK Delta as well as the Bristol Bay area, and then lower 40s for the Aleutians. Saturday afternoon highs going up to the mid 40s for all of Southwest, and then near 50 degrees for the Aleutian Islands. Looking ahead quickly at our climate, we are going to have higher chances to be above normal temperatures for southeast Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll start with a look at our flying weather for Friday morning. We have widespread MVFR conditions out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, and areas of MVFR with IFR moving through the state from the trough moving through from the west. We also have some MVFR pushing up through all of the Alaska range and out over the northwest coastline down to the Bering Strait area. Down in south central Alaska, area of IFR pushing into the northern Gulf and eastern portions of south central Alaska. And then down in the Panhandle, we have some areas of IFR expected. For Friday afternoon, going to clear up to VFR for the Panhandle, but we'll still have lingering IFR conditions over the northern Gulf extending into the eastern portions of South Central. Elsewhere in South Central, we have a mixture of MVFR and VFR conditions. MVFR will extend up through the Alaska range, southern portions of the interior, and down into southwest Alaska as well. Meanwhile, up north, we'll have some MVFR out by the Brooks Range and up along the northwest coast down through the Seward Peninsula area, and then widespread MVFR throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutians, with areas of IFR by the central Aleutian Islands. On Saturday morning, we're going to have MVFR conditions starting to push a little bit more to the east in the Bering Sea, so the central and eastern portion of the Bering Sea will have MVFR, as well as same areas of the Aleutians down into the Alaska Peninsula, where we'll also see some areas of IFR. Southwest Alaska will have MVFR that will push up much of the coastline up to the Ukqiagvik area. And then down in the interior and south central, we're going to have MVFR with IFR extending from the eastern interior down through the main portions of south central and along the North Gulf Coast towards the Yakutat area. Northern portions of the Panhandle will see some MVFR, and then southern portions are going to start to see more IFR conditions. On Saturday afternoon, southern portions of the Panhandle will clear up to VFR, but northern places of the Panhandle will drop all the way down to IFR, and that IFR will extend all throughout the northern portions of the Gulf and North Gulf Coast down through Kodiak Island. IFR also extending out over southwest Alaska and up north into the western portions of the interior, as well as the western portions of the Alaska Range. MVFR conditions will dominate the northern portions of the interior. Then up along the Arctic coastline, we're going to see some MVFR conditions, especially out west. Down in the Bering Sea, eastern portions will see MVFR, a small break of VFR before the next system comes in, bringing IFR conditions to the western Aleutians. Taking a look at our passes, we'll start up north. Anaktuvik, expected to be MVFR all day on Friday, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill should both also be in VFR all day on Friday, as well as Rainy Pass and Windy Pass. Isabel Pass will start off VFR, but then drop down to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Meanwhile, Mentasta should stay VFR all day on Friday. Tenita will start off VFR and then drop down to marginal, and Portage should stay in VFR all day on Friday. Chilkoot and White are expected to be VFR on Friday as well. For our freezing levels, we can see our surface freezing levels through much of the Brooks Range, then out into the Arctic part of the state. We have some warmer air coming in from the south, bringing up freezing levels up to as high as 12,000 feet over some of the Aleutian Islands, and then down in the Panhandle also up to as high as 12,000 feet in those southern portions. Taking a look at our icing, we do have some icing out over the western Bering and western Aleutian Islands between 2,000 and 5,000 feet expected. Then up along the northwestern portions of the state from the Seward Peninsula to the northwest coast, between 2,000 and 7,000 is expected. And then out over much of mainland Alaska, looking at areas of icing above 4,000 feet. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is out of the west by the western Aleutians up to as high as 165 knots. Then out over the central Bering down to 120 knots. Then out over the northeastern portion of mainland Alaska, a southwesterly flow, 120 knots there. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, we have some stronger winds in the northern portion of the state out of a westerly direction up to as high as 65 knots out over central Brooks Range and northeastern portions of the North Slope. Down in the Wrangell-St. Elias area, we have southwesterly winds, 60 knots, 45 knots out over the Lake Iliamna area, and then a westerly direction up to as high as 55 knots out of the central Aleutians and southern portions of the Bering Sea. As we move farther to the east or west, it's going to drop down to around 45 knots for areas of the western Aleutians as well as the eastern Aleutians. Taking a look now at 3,000 feet, some of our strongest winds still remain up along the Arctic coastline. Westerly winds up to as high as 50 knots through much of the North Slope and areas farther to the east. That's going to drop down as we get into the interior and south central Alaska, but we will have strong southerly winds around 40 knots in the eastern portions of Prince William Sound and the Cordova area. Along the west coast, we're going to see some stronger southwesterly winds, 40 to 45 knots, dropping down to around 35 knots closer to Nunavik Island. And then down in the central Aleutians where we have low pressure system, we're going to see westerly winds 50 knots expected. For turbulence all throughout mainland Alaska, below 4,000 feet along the west coast, below 5,000 feet by the Brooks Range, and below 6,000 feet for much of the interior and south central.
Hey star lovers, as we move into winter, Orion has returned to our skies, so let's use his sparkly belt to find the Pleiades and his young loves. Hit the darkness after 2 a.m. and look east for Orion. Use the 3 stars of his belt to draw a rough line toward Aldebaran in the constellation Taurus. You'll see what looks like a tiny dipper. That is the Pleiades. This cluster is named for 7 sisters. Legend says Orion fell for them, pining and chasing their affections before Zeus turned them into this cluster of stars. Now Orion and the Pleiades move across the sky, Orion chasing them still. The Pleiades are actually an open star cluster of more than 800 stars that form together from a cloud of gas and dust. The bright blue ones will burn out in a short 100 million year lifetime, short for a star, but long enough for us to enjoy them, so keep looking up.
If you've been watching this series, you know that NASA has scientists posted all over the world studying Earth's frozen regions. We've got people exploring ice sheets, glaciers, permafrost, sea ice, snow, and even ice on other planets. But even our top scientists need a little backup sometimes.
Do you like going outside to do science?
Yeah,
Why?
because it's fun.
Yeah. What's your favorite part?
Frost tube.
Frost tube! Cool!
In this bonus episode of Cryosphere, we're following the micro explorers that are helping NASA collect data from their own backyard.
Do you think it's going to be frozen?
Yeah.
Yes? Why?
Because it's very frozen!
Here's the idea. Students construct a frost tube that gets put into a hole in undisturbed and uncompacted soil. During the cold months, students will measure the depth at which water in the frost tube freezes, indicating that the surrounding soil has frozen. This is one of many citizen science projects facilitated by GLOBE, the Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment program.
What's going on? What did you find out?
It's the ice!
How far down is the ice? So is there still liquid in there?
It's a worldwide program that, so far, has collected over 130 million measurements from more than 10 million students in 113 countries.
Are you scientists?
Yeah.
These measurements are added to a massive worldwide database that's free and open to the public.
Globe connects my students with the rest of the world through science and looking at climate change and how it's affecting the future.
Globe teachers like Terry are transforming the way kids see science and how they'll respond to changes in their future environment.
Let me see your happy face.
Actually, we were so impressed with the kids of John Fredson's school that we decided to show their work to the scientists in the original NASA Explorers Cryosphere series. And they had a couple things to say.
Oh my god, that's awesome.
Oh my god.
Do you like going outside to do science? Why? How far down is the ice?
That's awesome.
Wow, this is really, really cool.
Hey students from Miss Terry's class, I just got to see your video. I was so impressed that you guys were braving the conditions of the snow and all the crazy stuff to go and learn more about the permafrost and where the water layer is right outside your school. That looked incredible.
It is so exciting to see you guys and girls doing such great work as we watch our planet change over time.
Hey there, young scientists. Looks like you guys are doing some amazing things. Remember to keep warm and take notes, and also stay curious.
Oh my god, this is awesome. I love seeing the enthusiasm of these kids. They're outside, it's obviously really cold, but everyone is so excited to be out there making measurements for NASA. That's wicked cool.
Because you're so right, science is so fun, and I really hope that you'll continue believing in that. The best piece of advice I ever got was, whatever you do, do your best.
And from all of us here at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, remember, dare mighty things.
So keep up the great work. Make sure that you're having fun no matter what. That's the key thing about pursuing a career in science. Make sure it's something that you love. And I'm really impressed. So hopefully we'll take the lessons you're learning and apply them when we explore our solar system.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll start off with a look at the ice edge. We do have some ice on the northern portions of the Seward Peninsula as well as along the Arctic coastline. However, we do expect these areas to melt or at least move off away from the land for over the next couple days from all of the winds that we have pushing that ice around. And meanwhile, up north in the main ice pack, we do expect that to retreat 20 to 40 miles over the next couple days as well. Taking a look down at our marine zones, and for Friday in southeast Alaska, light winds in the inside waters out of a northerly direction, and also fairly light out over the Gulf as well, primarily northerly direction, 10 to 15 knots. Picking up as we get into Saturday in the inside waters, becoming southerly 20 to 25 miles per hour, or knots rather, and out over the Gulf waters, southerly winds 20 to 25 knots, with seas up to as high as 9 feet, highest up north. For Friday for South Central, fairly light in Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots out of a southerly direction, and then out over the Gulf waters, 15 to 20 knots out of a easterly direction, and in Prince William Sound, 10 knots out of a northeast direction. On Saturday, picking up here quite a bit out by the Barren Islands, westerly winds 40 knots, with seas up to as high as 13 feet. In Cook Inlet, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, and then out over the northern portion of the Gulf of Alaska, southerly winds 20 to 30 knots, and that's going to continue in to Prince William Sound as well. Out by the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, light winds 10 to 15 knots out of a northeasterly direction on the southern side of Kodiak Island. Picking up on Saturday out of a west to northwest direction, 25 knots on the Bering side, 25 to 30 knots on the Pacific side, and 30 to 35 knots around Kodiak Island. Seas up to as high as 11 feet on the eastern side of Kodiak. For the Aleutian Islands on Friday, out over the central and eastern Aleutians, light winds, 10 knots for the most part. Just south of the central Aleutian Islands, south winds 15 knots, and then 15 knots out over the western Aleutian Islands. For Saturday, picking up here as well, southeast winds 40 to 45 knots by the western Aleutians, seas up to as high as 22 feet, highest out to the west. Then out over the central Aleutian Islands, easterly winds 35 to 40 knots there, and then northerly winds by the eastern Aleutian Islands 20 to 25 knots. Along the west coast of the state, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots north of Nunavik Island, and then south of Nunavik Island around 15 knots, and that includes the Pribilof Islands as well. On Saturday, going to see westerly winds 20 to 25 knots for most locations along the southwest coast, and then in Norton Sound, northwest winds 10 knots is expected. Up along the Arctic coastline, we have southwest winds starting off 20 knots by the Beaufort Sea, picking up to 40 knots by the time we get to AKwx, and then westerly winds down the west coast 30 to 40 knots, strongest by Point Lay, and the Bering Strait area around 25 knots out of the southwest. Seas up to as high as 17 feet, highest by the AKwx area. Then on Saturday, calming down a little bit here, south to southwest winds 10 to 15 knots out by the Beaufort Sea, up to as high as 20 knots by AKwx, and down the west coast, west to southwest winds 10 to 15 knots, picking up to the Bering Strait, up to as high as 20 knots there. Quick recap for the state. I do want to point out that we have quite a few warnings and advisories out, many of which are along the west coast, northwest coastline for high winds and for coastal flooding concerns. Then we also have some wind advisories around the Alaska Range and dense fog advisories for the Panhandle. For any additional information on these, please check out our website, weather.gov/Alaska, and stay up to date on all of the current observations and data that we have out. For this system coming in, we do have those strong winds up by the northwest coast. It's also going to bring in a mix of rain and snow to the northwest coastline, as well as some of those areas of coastal flooding that we have concerns for from the Bering Strait through the AKwx area. We're going to see some snow in the Brooks Range and a mix of rain and snow for the western interior, primarily rain for the eastern locations. Down in south central Alaska, going to see rain in some of the low-lying areas with some snow potential in the mountains. And then down in the Panhandle, high pressure is going to allow for fog to form overnight. Out west, we have another system approaching from the North Pacific, bringing rain to the western Aleutian Islands. And as we move into Friday, that system moved to the central Aleutian Islands, bringing rain to those areas as well as into the Bering Sea and Pribilof Islands. Out over south central Alaska, we're going to have rain coming up from the south, rain along the North Gulf Coast, snow at higher elevations, and rain extending in to the interior. We're also going to have some snow up in the Brooks Range and rain starting to return to the northwest coast. And down in the Panhandle area, high pressure is going to continue to dominate with areas of fog in the morning hours. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.